Yeah, so you've picked a template, so you know which project type you're gonna go with, whether that's a service project, a product, um, the software one, whether it's a Kanban, whether it's the business, whether it's a Scrum one. You've made your
Mhm.
selection. You should know which one's there. The next step that I usually take at this point is now we're gonna start with the issue type. And the reason I start with issue types is because everything else is governed by the issue type, or
Mhm.
if we're gonna use the right word,
Everything's
work item
attached
type.
to it.
Everything,
It
yeah, the
revolves
workflows, the
around
custom
it.
fields, screens,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
Pretty
By the
much
way, the
everything else.
boards, the business boards, they're not removing those separate boards. So that is staying. In fact, they actually increased the number of boards you can have, which is super awesome. So it was a limit of 5. I haven't hit the limit yet, but I'm assuming it's like 10 at this point.
Why would you
But
need
pretty
10
cool.
though? We'll have to talk about that later, but
You'd be
I don't know why you
surprised.
need 10.
We actually have a use case that we could chat about later.
Alright. So, let's jump into issue types then and, like, or again, work types. I don't know why Atlassian thought this was a good idea to change this.
I
Such a
like work
great.
types. 'Cause,
You like
let's
anything I don't
say
like, so
let's say I create a today, I actually created an issue type, and I'm generally pretty opposed creating issue types that are not, you know, task, epic, your typical stuff. But we created one called bill because we wanted a way to track the way that clients get billed and like see all that information. Where was I going with this?
why you like work types?
Yes, but the bill is not an issue. It's just a general tracking
Thing.
thing, right? It's like
I
issue
would've been
doesn't
happy they
quite
just would've called it a
merge.
thing type. Thing type would have been a much better name than.
Work thing.
Alright, well, so we have our work item types here, and depending on the template you pick, you are going to have a pre-selected number of options available to you. So pay
Mhm,
attention to which template you do pick because that's gonna alter what you see on this screen. Now, I, for just the demo here, picked software, Scrum. And so because of that, you get the very traditional story, bug, epic, task, and subtask. And some of the topics that I wanted to talk about, and I think the first debate, because this is pretty standard, right? This Jira will ship with this,
mhm.
and you're gonna fall in two camps, right? Like if you pick the business template, you're probably just gonna have what is it? Just task and subtask, right?
Sometimes they include epic, but yeah, task and subtask is standard.
But that's yeah, that's I think you gotta pull in the epic. But yeah, you normally get the two tiers there. Here you get epic, task, subtask, and then two other ones, which we'll talk about.
Mhm,
And then all the service management ones, they're very different, right? But
yeah.
assuming again we're in the software space, the first big question that I usually have for the team is, what is all this? Like, how do I use these things? And one of the first things that I usually coach my teams on is Jira is a minimum 3-level hierarchy tool. When you compare it to other tools, they handle hierarchies a little bit differently. Some tools do it really cool, like ClickUp. Other teams don't, like Trello. And I think it's important to kind of understand before we start defining what these things are,
Mhm.
because they're going to be in your project already.
What do you mean by
You,
minimum 3 hierarchy? Like, are you saying
well,
you have to have 3?
I mean, you can technically just have one, right? You can get rid of
Mhm,
everything and just have like a task,
right.
right? But you're gonna have if you pick this template here, it's gonna come with the epic, then the story
Mhm,
task and bug, and then the subtask below that. So you're gonna have that minimum 3 built
yep.
in. You're not forced into it, right? You could remove features or
Mhm.
remove hierarchy levels, but
Which a lot of people
the
do, like remove a subtask, for example.
yeah, but the so that's a great transition to what I was trying to get to, right? Before you look at this, before you try to figure out what's a story, what's a bug, what's an epic task, subtask, make sense of all that, what you need to do is figure out what does your work look like in your organization, right? Like if you had to do it on
Mhm,
pen and paper, how do you structure your work? Because that's going to govern what kind of issue types you do need or don't need, or what modifications you'll have to make.
yep. For sure. Like, if you're an engineering team, you probably don't need task. You probably just need story, bug, maybe feature, epic,
Yeah.
like those types of things. Whereas a business team, you don't need bugs, stories. maybe even epics. You just need a task most of the time.
Right. And so it's important for you again to have that very meaningful conversation to figure out how many layers you have in your work and how nuanced is your work. Because if you treat everything equal and you're like everything's just a task, it's something that I write on a sticky note, right? And we're just everything is equal value, then Josh is right. You just need a task and that's it. You can get rid of everything else. And you don't need all this extra what I'll put in air quotes complexity because you're just treating everything equal.
Mhm.
Now, in the wonderful world of Jira, specifically in the world of Scrum, everything here makes sense except the story and the task. Every team that I've ever coached and worked with, they're like, why do we have both a story and a task?
Mhm.
What's your answer, Josh? What do you normally tell people? What's your thoughts
Depends
on
on
this?
the team. So, I mean, my opinion is that Atlassian would probably just throw this in to give you more options. That's kind of my assumption. But if you're an engineering team, you probably don't want to have a task in here unless you have a very specific use case for it. But I'm guessing if you do, it's probably something that might need to be
Yeah.
changed.
So this goes beyond engineering though. This setup here is
Mhm.
more influenced by agile than it is by like an engineering process.
So
And
you're
any
saying
team
task is relevant here.
task is very much relevant, especially if you're an
Mhm.
agile team. Like if you're looking at like if you just took your certified Scrum Master training or any of those agile trainings,
Yeah.
task is very important, right? So let me see, ADO, um, let me call it Azure DevOps hierarchy. I can't spell hierarchy. It's like the one word I can never spell. Definitely and hierarchy, I struggle with so much.
Well, Azure
um,
DevOps is like a different beast of a
It
tool.
is. It is a very different beast, but it does Agile the best. And so when you
Mhm.
look at the Agile, like how Agile works,
Mhm.
this feature here, the way this is set up, this is how most
Hmm.
Agile teams learn it, right? Where you have an epic, then you have a
Interesting.
feature, then you have a PBI or product backlog item, and then you have a task,
Yeah, this is
right?
quite different.
It is very quite different. And so this right here, though, this picture with the user story and the task, this is how we learn it in the world of Agile, where we have a user story. And then underneath that user story will be the task. But Jira doesn't work that way.
Yeah, it treats
Jira
it
treats
same.
it just at the same. And the subtask is really the task. And this is like
Mhm.
usually where I have to coach the teams the most to kind of shift that mentality because I'm like, your subtask is what you've been trained to be your task. So you got to
Mhm.
make that shift for dude, especially when you need it nested the way this picture is here.
Yeah.
It's the only way the subtask takes the role of the task.
So you can technically shift the hierarchy up. Would you ever recommend doing that?
Yeah, so so to get this picture specifically, right? Because a lot of teams
Mhm.
that I work with, they want this middle picture here. And so what I do because you cannot so one of the rules that you cannot do is I cannot stick something between that level 0 and that level -1, which is my task and my
Right.
subtask, right? I can't. I wish I could. I think that would be such a cool feature if Atlassian could let us do that. But we can go from the level 1 up and we can modify it however we want. So what I normally do is I will rename the feature. Sorry, I will rename Epic into a feature because it's already sitting here at this level 1. If this was -1, this was 0, and this is 1, and then I will create a new Epic and assign it to level 2. And that's how we got the
Mhm.
picture here. But you cannot unfortunately stick anything in between the story and the task.
Right. But would you recommend shifting up? Like, is that a recommendation you would ever make?
As of 2026, yes. If you
Mhm.
had asked me this question in 2022, hell no.
Why? What changed?
Apple, sorry, Apple. Atlassian finally figured out how to do their job correctly.
So, like, what in the system changed that makes you say, okay, now it's actually doable and it's
Yeah.
suggestible?
So back in the day, when you were 2 years old, back in the day, we used to have something called an Epic link,
Mm. So the way
and
the
we
linking
used to have
works, that's
the
the
way
big
the
change.
linking worked, Atlassian hard coded it in there. So the
Mhm.
story or the story level, right? Whether it was the story, the task, or the bug, it had a field for the epic link. And then the epic had a field called an epic name. And it was the most annoying thing. I don't know if you ever got to experience this, but it was the most annoying thing because whenever you created an epic, you needed to give it the summary. and you needed to give it the epic name.
Right.
Because without the epic name, the epic was useless.
Mhm.
Because the story was relying on the epic's name to populate the epic link to establish the handshake.
All that to say it was a bad way of structuring hierarchy, and now it's
They had a
actually good.
really they had a really crappy way, but hold up, it got
Mhm.
worse. Okay, it got really worse. That I wish that was the end of the story. It was worse. That's how they handled the story to the epic relationship.
Mhm.
The story to the subtask relationship was a parent-child relationship. So they had something called the parent ID, and then, the subtask would reference its parent ID, and then it would know who the parent was based on that parent ID, right? But
Mhm.
every item needed to have an issue ID, which was a unique identifier of the issue, and then you
Yep.
would try to map up with the parent ID. It was like a whole mess too. But again, the fun doesn't stop there. To go above the epic, Atlassian introduced something called the parent link, which is
Mhm.
different than the parent ID to go to the subtask and the task. And so now you're in this like super high three-dimensional world. You're playing 3D chess with Jira, and it was like the most annoying thing in the world. Luckily, they got rid of all that around 2023, and they just made parent child, parent child, parent
Mhm.
child, parent child. You can go up and
No
down as
matter
much as
the hierarchy and
yeah,
everything, it's
no
just
matter it's
always
just
the
the
same.
parent and the child. Yeah,
Great.
but in there was a very painful 18-month
Mhm.
transitionary period where they broke everything in the meantime.
I remember that, yeah.
So I lost all my epics one day,
Wow. Well, I'm
all of
glad
them.
those days are over.
It all just disappeared one day, and I that was the first and last time that I ever did an EAP for Atlassian. Because this parent-child change was an EAP, and that was the
Mhm.
last time I ever did an EAP. Because I was like,
I
"You
think
know
I've done
what?
every single EAP I've ever could have from Jira.
I avoid them because of that. That one incident avoided it." But anyway,
So
so
to
Jira
to
sets
to
us up for failure.
broaden to broaden this conversation, I think this is the most challenging part of generally setting up a good work management system. And to be honest, I think this is why you and myself have jobs and businesses in this, because a lot of people can go in here and they're like, "Oh, cool, I need this epic, this bug, this story," but it's really more about how does work actually happen? What is the best way to actually structure this for our company? And those are the decisions that are probably the hardest to make. Do you have any tips on like actually suggesting how to set this up for teams that do work very differently?
Yeah, no, I like what you said there. I'll echo something you said before we jump into that because how you do it correctly, and this is why we're starting here, right? Because how
Mhm.
you set this up is gonna influence the rest of the configurations.
Yeah.
So you mess this part up, you're really shooting yourself in the foot from, like, day 1. But what
You could
I
fix
normally
it, but it's
yeah,
harder.
yeah, you definitely fix it. So it's better to start with your best foot forward.
Mhm.
So what I normally do is I sit down with, like, a team, and I try to map how work lands on an individual contributor's desk, right? How
Mhm.
does a team member on your team actually get work? And so does that come because somebody sent a Slack message? Does that come because they got an email? Is there like a weekly meeting that tasks are delegated on, right? What is the order and how does work move around your organization? And I try to get an example and try to put like different personas so that I can figure out and identify the different types of work and
Mhm.
ultimately the path that that work takes to eventually get to somebody, the where the rubber meets the road, so to speak.
Yeah.
And
That's
and that's
fantastic. That's exactly how I would do it. Yeah.
and it's a very deep and very empowering conversation that a lot of teams don't really give a lot of thought to. So it's a very good exercise for them to like go through
Mhm.
it because
Agree.
a lot of things magically happen behind the scenes, and then they just stick it in Jira and hope that magic happens the other end, and it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and the biggest problem here is that people jump into Jira and they pick this template and they're like, "Oh, this is how it works. We're gonna use how this template suggested us to work." Or they
Right.
might even hire a Jira admin and be like, "Hey, set up this Jira project for us with 0 context to how they do work and 0 information." It's just the Jira admin jumping in, setting up a quick board, a couple statuses, and then you just kind of make a couple tweaks. And that is absolutely the wrong way to do it in this scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I try to find the different types of work because if your team is not going to do any firefighting, you don't need bugs. But if your
Mhm,
team is clearly like there's concept of operational work and I forgot the word for non-operational work, right? But operational work is like bugs, right? Defects. Like
mhm.
you're reacting to work versus you're proactively creating work. And so I like to first make that first determination of does your team care? Do they react to somebody else's problems that they need to go address? Or are they always just making new work? Because
Mhm.
there's different issue types that we would need for the different types of work. And
Right.
we're going to handle operational, reactive work very, very differently than, hey, we're masters of our destiny and our
Mhm.
future. And like, we're going to, invent something new. And so I think that's a good conversation that I usually have to
Okay.
first determine, do we need bugs in here or not? The
So,
next con Go ahead.
yeah, speaking of those work types, I'm sure you'll kind of generally agree that the less the better, generally, very generally speaking. And we can move forward, but I guess one of my questions would be, or I'm sure someone who's watching is, what are the moments that we absolutely know that we will need another work type? Like, what are those key
Yeah.
moments? Like one
The
that I
key
could
one
think
is
of
the
is the
process.
workflow.
Yeah, the workflow and the process, right? Like,
Mhm,
what steps do you expect that different type of work to take? Because that
mhm,
operational work is very much usually you have to adjudicate it or triage it because,
yeah.
everybody runs around with their heads cut off and, like, crying that the sky is falling. But it's not always an emergency, right? It's not always a problem. Sometimes I have a shirt that I love, right? It says a bug, it's not a feature, it's a bug, or it's not a bug, it's a feature,
Yeah.
right? And like some people will claim that it's a bug, and I'm like, no, this is a feature. Like it's designed to work that way. It's a crappy design, but a design nonetheless. So, but you got to figure that out, right? And you're gonna treat operational work
Yeah.
differently than you're gonna treat like a project work.
So essentially before the inception of the work type or sort of during the inception of the work type, you kind of have to think through how will that work happen in the future.
Yes, and who is influencing the work too, right? And at
Mhm.
what level does work originate? Because if some
Yeah.
companies have goals and objectives that need to trickle
Mhm.
down to a task, like what does that decomposition look like? Right?
Yeah.
Do we need to now pull in Atlassian goals, right? We've had these conversations in
Mhm.
our weekly discussions, right? But if you're tying your work up to a goal, then there's a smart and strategic way to decompose
Right.
that work down to the task level. Do you
Yeah.
have directors influencing work? Do you have a client influencing work? Do you have a customer influencing work? Right? Do you have a change
Mhm.
management process that influences work? Like these are very, very important to understand how does work ultimately come into your
Mhm.
organization. And then once you figure out how the work comes in, because I think that's a very critical step, is how
Mhm.
does work come in? And then once you know how the work came in, what kind of work is coming in? And
Yeah.
then based on that, then you can start having, okay, what kind of types of work types do I put in Jira to track that work?
Yeah. And to like this is all a little bit theoretical to give like a very specific example of something I did today, which I'll do a non-engineering workflow because I think it's simpler and it also draws a lot of good parallels for like bugs and features. So we have one board called accounting, and on that board we have things like okay, update the books, do this, do that, general tasks.
Pay your
But
partners,
huh?
pay your bills.
Pay your bills, yeah, do all those typical things. But we also wanted a place where we could track our invoices for clients, see if they're past due, see if they've been sent out. And we didn't really like that's not really a task. That's something we wanted, number one, in like its own separate view, but also had a completely different workflow from a
Mhm.
general task. And specifics of that were like a task is in progress, in review, done. Whereas the bill work type that we set up is drafting, sent, past due, and paid. So it's an
Yeah,
entirely different workflow that is required to get that piece of work to completed. And when you have that very, very, different workflow, you have to have a different work type. That's the only way to be able to do it.
yeah. And I want to add to that because another layer that I add to that exact conversation you're having is, does any of this work have to 100% exist in relation to another piece of work? So
That's
for
great.
example, you wouldn't invoice if you didn't have like a client project or something, right?
Exactly.
So that is a conversation that I'm having of, do I make it a subtask type or do I make it a standalone type? Because a
Yeah.
subtask type can never exist if it's not tied to a parent. And so that's a very critical conversation that I have with people, like risks, right? When they want to capture risk, well, does a risk just magically appear on its own, or is it always a cause, or is it caused by
Mhm.
some other work? And when you have
Right.
those relationships, then you can understand, okay, I should make this a subtask type instead of a regular standalone type.
It's a great
So
point, yeah, thinking of
important
the
conversations I'm having.
relationships with everything else, potentially dependencies, but also, does this belong to something or does it
Yeah,
nest
like,
under
will you
something
ever
else?
have an invoice just for fun, or will every invoice always be tied to a client, right? At
Yeah.
which point, do you have a
Mhm.
client issue type that then has an invoice issue type associated to it? Like, those
Yeah,
kind of
I mean,
conversations, right?
yeah, for us, it was like we just want the invoice and it ties to our we automated it from our invoicing platform, but we do have a separate we use spaces or different projects in Jira for each client. What we
Mhm.
used to do is actually just have a task in each board to say invoice this client. The problem there was it was kind of getting lost and it did sort of work, but we just wanted a different way where everything was in one place and associated only with the accounting team.
Yeah. So again, but these are very important conversations you should be having when you're
Yeah.
trying to figure out how many and which ones and what order you need them in.
And just saying this, like, there's more than one way to do something in Jira. Like, there's multiple ways that are probably gonna work fairly well. I think it's just getting a really good understanding of how your team works and what's gonna be the best process for them. And again,
Yeah.
that's why we work and consult with companies because we help with that process, but that's something that you have to do if you want a very successful way of
Yeah.
using this tool.
And I'll add more color to that too, right? Because like, let's just say Epic. This is a very common one. If I have a team that's not a software team, they could care less about epics, especially when they
Mhm.
don't even do or believe in Agile. Epic is an Agile term, and if you're not
Yeah.
practicing Agile in any way, shape, or form, you could care less about epics. So you can rename it to client or project or initiative
Mhm.
or whatever name you want, right? But
Yeah.
there's consequences because renaming an epic is a global change, right? You are allowed to create multiple issue types at the same level. So I can have multiple epic level items, right?
Mhm.
I can add, as you can see here, I have three. I have this epic, risk, and deliverable at the same level,
Which is
but
confusing because it's an
it
epic
can be
level, which
right.
is a little
But
weird.
here's where things get worse. So this, whatever you name here, will propagate throughout Jira and rename things. So if I
Mhm.
were to change this to feature, everywhere where Jira used to say epic will now say feature or whatever I put in here.
Yeah.
But that's global. So if you're sharing your Jira with two or three different departments, and one team is agile and is expecting epics, and a
Mhm.
marketing team is not, that can just really mess with your mind a lot.
If I was a betting man, I would bet that this would probably be changed very soon, just like we lost the Epic link, and they'll probably change this a little bit.
I would like for Atlassian to let us have more flexibility here.
Yeah. I mean, the level name to me is kind of irrelevant. All that really matters is the level
No, but
itself.
no, but the level name is very important because when I hit save here,
No, no, no.
right?
As of today, yes. But like
Yes,
in
it is very
general,
important, but I think, yeah, I see what you're saying. As Atlassian abstracts the need to not
mhm,
depend on epics, it
yeah.
shouldn't be putting like it should.
All that matters is the actual hierarchy. So is this a level
Yeah,
one, two, three, four,
right. So
something like
it
that?
Jira should be smart enough to know, hey, I have risks in here. Show me the risk level and not don't worry about an epic if I don't have an epic in here.
Yep.
Right? Just call it the levels. Yeah,
I
that
I
would
I'm
probably
just
be a
kind of
smarter
pointing that out because
perspective.
they're moving away from that very agile Scrum type work, so this will probably be slightly different in the next few years, I'm assuming.
Stay tuned for Team 26. Josh's prediction. Alright, a couple more things to call out though, and I think just to go back to this whole story versus task thing, you don't need both if you don't need them.
Mhm,
The first thing that I usually do if a team is very, like, lean and they're like, "We just need a task," I take out the story and we just have a task. If a team's like, we are very software driven, we need our stories, we leave the story, we take out the task. Now, what I try to do is I just keep it all and I try to tell the team a story is going to be for work that is value added to the company. So you're going to potentially whatever you build in that story, you're going to sell, right? Make money.
mhm.
And a task is a valuable thing for the team, not for the business, but for the team.
That's a
So
great way
like
to put it.
yeah. And then so my story explains what needs to be done, but valuable to the business. My bug is self-explanatory because it's a problem, right? Something didn't go
Yep.
right. The epic is just a collector of stories. That's how I usually pitch it. My task is again going to be valuable to the team, but not the business. And then my subtask describes how to do the thing that is connected
Mhm.
to. So the
You
step by
mentioned
step.
Epic is a collector of stories, but Bug can roll up into Epic, and do you ever see that happening, or is that common or recommended?
we should have a different discussion on should bugs even exist.
I mean,
Um,
I would think so. Like, it makes
I
sense, right?
so the way I do my epics, the way I physically treat my epics is as the feature or the capability.
Okay, makes
Okay.
sense.
And because of that,
So it's
when
kind of the
I am
story.
it's the it's the capability, right? It's because
Ah, okay. It's
right,
not the
and
feature,
like
it's the capability of the
it's the
feature.
capability you're trying to
Okay.
deliver, and the story is
Mhm.
gonna be making it up, so or make
Mhm.
it's gonna compose the epic. So you're gonna have a lot of key requirements that will
Right.
eventually deliver that capability. But in your process to deliver that capability, you are gonna run into a problem or 2, so I personally like to link the bug back up to the capability, so you know that this capability is not ready because we have problems against it.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
that's how I normally do it.
No, that makes sense. Okay. So generally speaking, with these work types, you're probably going to start out with the template that either has things you don't need or maybe doesn't have things you do need. And this will most likely always need to be changed. And
Yeah,
it's better to change it now because the moment you start creating these, you have to migrate away from them, delete them, or do something with them later.
yeah. So I would say, because we only have a couple minutes here left, 1, understand your different types of work and
Hmm.
understand the relationships to each other
Yeah.
outside of Jira, right? Just don't even worry about Jira first. Like, figure out your process on paper first,
Hmm.
because how what that looks like ultimately will influence this hierarchy here, because
Yeah.
this is gonna play a critical role in how you ultimately build out all your issue types, because some issue types or word types are gonna be in some projects and some are gonna be in different projects. And having that conversation is important, which is again why you hire people like Josh and I, because there's no silver bullet here. There's no like,
Hmm.
here's how you do it. But what Josh and I are gonna do though, right, as part of our effort for this training is like, if you're this type of team, here's your issue types and what they mean. If you're this type
Yeah.
of team, here's your issue types and what they mean. And so we are gonna be publishing these kind of things, but these are the conversations we're having internally
Mhm.
to determine which of these is best.
And to add a comment here, like this is the reason Agile, Scrum, like these things exist because teams need a fixed structure that they can just rely on and use. Like that's the purpose of these systems. That way you're not just guessing and jumping in. You're like, okay, this is how Agile is done. We're going to follow this process.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'll propose here, keep it simple, right? I think when
Mhm.
in doubt, start with the task, right? Just start with a
Yeah.
very linear task, and then you're going to start to be able to build upon it, right? And you're gonna go, oh wait, my task, they need to be broken down. Great. Then
Mhm.
pull in the subtask and the task. And then
Yeah.
you're gonna be like, wait, but I need to group these tasks together. Great. Pull in a project or pull in an epic or whatever you want to call it, but now you're grouping the tasks together. And you're like, well, I have multiple teams that are working across these things and I need to group those together. I'm like, great, pull in something above that one, right? And you can always start building up
Yeah.
into, but I think the easiest way to think about your issue types is to really think about where does work originate at the highest possible level in your organization and
Mhm.
figure out all the breakdowns that have to happen to when you finally get to somebody putting a pencil to paper.
But the less the better. Like don't go crazy with
Right.
this and
The less the
20
better, or
hierarchies.
the simple the better. Yeah, the simple the better. Don't get too caught up in the details, because one
Mhm.
thing we haven't talked about yet is, and this is what, like, I was just looking at a client, earlier, and they have 3 issue types at the same level for the epic. And I'm like,
Mhm.
"This doesn't need to be 3 issue types. This needs to be a field that's a drop down that calls out what type of work is it."
Yeah.
And so
To
there's
to
you
identify
gotta
the type of work.
right. So you are using the real initiative, or sorry, the real picture here is that your issue type should really govern different fields and different workflows in your processes that you're
Yeah.
gonna need. Because if you get too caught up in the details of like, I need this type of work, like I need a billing and I need expenses and I need income and I need output, right? Like you're getting so granular and you're adding all these 20 different issue types. Like that's not
Mhm.
healthy either.
Right.
Because you can have like a expense type, and it could be labor, right? Licensing, whatever. You don't need a licensing issue type. You
Mhm.
don't need a labor issue type. You don't need all these extra issue types when you have fields that are gonna work in conjunction here.
Yeah. I think that was a great all around
Yeah.
rundown. One
Of
last
our
thing
thought
I'll
process.
say as we wrap up, I really like what you said when you mentioned that you can always expand and move out. because that is super easy to do. You could always add a subtask. You could always add an epic. You could always add an initiative. What is a lot harder to do is to remove that.
Remove.
And that is a lot of times what we get hired to do because it's very, very difficult to escape that, big monstrosity that was created after so long and so many things were added. So start small if you're in doubt and then just expand outward. It'll be a lot easier that way.
Yeah. And keep an eye out because again, Josh and I we're gonna be putting out like, here's the hierarchy that you should have for different
Mhm.
personas. So we'll be publishing those soon.
Yes.
Thank you all for being a member and appreciate you all. Hopefully this sandbox series is
Yeah.
valuable to you all.
Hopefully it's helpful.